And there will be a bit of a poll, I think, at the end of the meeting. So if you could, hopefully, what is it?
It's not as exciting as a poll, but it's just a couple of questions survey about the meeting.
Okay, thank you. So if you could try, I mean, hopefully we will be on time. We generally are on time with these meetings, and your feedback is really important to help us decide the sort of whether these meetings are useful and the future format of these meetings. We have discussions about issues that are current in relation to the advice sector, and we felt that actually the crisis that is happening at the moment in Afghanistan was pretty important. It is directly relevant to people in Norfolk, not just advice services, but people from Afghanistan, and also people who live in the UK as part of the Afghan diaspora. So we just thought it would be good to bring in agencies that are working directly with impacted communities, to share experiences and stories, to raise awareness, but also to just to see what collectively, if there's anything else that we should be doing from an advice and wider agency perspective. So thanks very much for your time. I realise everybody's really busy, so we do appreciate you taking the time to come and hear we've got to say. So we've got some really powerful stories to bring to you, and maybe to bring to your attention groups like English Plus, Bridge Plus, and New Roots, who are doing some really important work within the communities. And obviously I would be biased, but to also talk about for Des to give an update on some of the great work that's gone on in immigration and some of those wider issues. I'm going to hand over to Emily to just to talk a little bit very briefly about NCAN, what it is, what it does, and then I think, Beatrice, I'm going to hand over to you to lead on, for you to speak, and then maybe to hand over to the speakers from New Roots and English Plus. Is that okay? Thank you.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'll be very brief. It's good to see some familiar faces and also some new names. So for those of you who don't know, NCAN is the Norfolk Community Advice Network. We're an alliance of charities in Norfolk who provide social welfare and legal advice. We're led by 9 charities in our steering group, which includes Norfolk Community Law Service, Shelter, Equal Lives, MAP, Age UK Norfolk and Age UK Norwich, Norfolk Citizens Advice, Dis and Deptford Citizens Advice, and the Bridge Plus. And between us, we provide quality, free advice in a range of legal issues and social welfare issues. So things like debt and welfare benefits, housing, family law, employment law, and of course immigration advice as well. We formed to make sure that we could work together rather than in competition or in isolation from each other, and we aim to improve access to good quality, free and impartial advice. We host these meetings every 2 months to bring important issues to the table that affect all different areas of work and different sectors, to encourage that kind of cross-sector discussion and looking at ways that we can improve people's lives as a collective in the county. We also host the online referral system, which is used by over 100 organisations in Norfolk. In lots and lots of different charities use it, as well as services within health, Norfolk County Council and other local authorities. And the aim of the referral system is to enable clients and service users to get to the right place at the right time as soon as they need it, without having to be battered around between different places, repeating their story, essentially just being told to go ring this phone number and explain their situation. So the referral system is available for any organisation that wants to use it. So if you're not part of it, please get in touch with us and we can have a chat about how you can join the referral system. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Over to you, Beatrice.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. So before Patrick, colleague from New Roots, tells us more about their work with asylum seekers and refugees, we thought it may be useful to just provide a bit of background information, some statistics and definitions, perhaps, about, the situation and of asylum seekers and refugees in Norwich and Norfolk. Just to go back a little bit in time, perhaps, to put the current situation into context. So I'll try and keep it brief before I pass on over to Patrick, but just to note that approximately 1% of the 26.4 million refugees worldwide are in the UK. Asylum applications actually peaked in 2002, so quite a while ago, and there were 84,000 main applicants at the time. In 2018, these were around 35,000 main applicants. The Home Office data shows that there were about 36,000 asylum applications between April 2019 and March 2020, so just before the COVID.
You've muted, Beatrice.
Oh, sorry about that. Just to put this into context, I was just about to say this compares with over 165,000 applications in Germany, over 150,000 in France, over 115,000 in Spain. So an asylum seeker is a person who has left their country of origin and formally applied for asylum in another country and whose claim is not yet concluded. So asylum seekers in the UK are not allowed to work normally anyway, and they're provided with accommodation and support to meet their essential living needs. That's £39.63 per week per person. And a lot of charities and groups have campaigned to show that this is not enough to meet someone's essential needs. A person becomes a refugee when the government agrees that they meet the definition as per the Refugee Convention. Usually refugees in the UK are given 5 years leave, and then after that, those 5 years, they have to apply for indefinite leave to remain. I won't go into detail. Des will cover that in a little while. So how many asylum seekers and refugees are there in Norwich and Norfolk? We actually don't know. So what do we know is that Norwich became a dispersal area in 2003. So under the dispersal scheme, all new asylum seekers in the UK are transferred to a locality outside London and the southeast, and they obviously haven't got choice as to where they are sent, and they are then accommodated, if they need accommodation, by the Home Office contractor, which is Serco in Norwich. There are up to 150 accommodation places in Norwich at the moment. If people are granted refugee status, they may or not stay in Norwich, or they may move to other places in the UK. Conversely, some people who lived in the UK as asylum seekers, once they are granted refugee status, may decide to move to Norwich. We know people who have done that. And then when it comes to resettlement programs, which is obviously something we are hearing a lot about at the moment in the context of the Afghan crisis. So at the moment, we know that Norfolk County Council and district local authorities have volunteered to welcome Afghan refugees through the new Afghan Relocations and Assistance policy. So this is the ARAP program. Bear with me, quite a few acronyms there. These are for people and their families who have supported the British military in Afghanistan. It's also likely that councils will be involved in another program for Afghan nationals, which is the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, ACRS. It's not yet confirmed exactly what this would look like, but the government, the UK government, has announced that they expect up to 5,000 people to come through the first year of this new program. But Norfolk's involvement in resettlement program is not new. It actually dates back at least, I think, to 2007. So between 2007 and 2010, the Gateway Protection Program resettled people of Congolese nationality who lived in refugee camps in countries neighboring the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. There were also a group of Iraqi nationals who had worked with the British Army, who were also resettled in Greater Norwich area through the Gateway Protection Program between, again, 2007 2011. And I believe in total, I've tried to look for statistics about that, but actually it's not that easy to find. But according to an Oxfam evaluation report of the Gateway Program, there were a total of 330 people who were resettled locally through the Gateway Protection Program. And then, of course, there is the Syrian Vulnerable People Resettlement Program. Since 2017, and 162 people have been resettled in Greater Norwich. I should also mention that there are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in Norwich, supported again through Norfolk County Council, and I just want to mention the name of a local group, local project, the Norwich International Youth Project, who works with unaccompanied asylum seekers. Last but not least, it's important to mention the Nationality and Borders Bill published in July this year, that is currently going through Parliament. Charities and community groups fear that the government's proposals included in the bill will establish a two-tier protection system, which will be at the disadvantage of people, who will create differences between refugees according to how they arrived in the UK. So we're quite concerned about those proposals, and a lot of charities again have raised concerns as to whether those proposals contradict established case law in the UK. So I'll stop now. I'll come back later to talk briefly about Bridge Plus work, but I'll now ask Patrick from New Roots. Patrick, you're here? Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. So my name's Patrick Keaton Armstrong. I'm the Adult Support Coordinator for Norwich Integration. And as Beatrice alluded to, we work with asylum seekers as well as refugees and other migrants in Norwich. So we do, yeah, I thought I'd just kind of remind everyone who doesn't, tell everyone who doesn't already know and remind those who do already know about the sort of services that we offer. And then go through some of the issues that are, especially our asylum seeking participants sort of face. So there's kind of two components to what New Roots does, and that's kind of like a social element or an activities-based element, and then a one-to-one support element. So the social or other activities that we organise include English classes, which are still online for the time being until the end of October. And they've been running right the way through the pandemic. We are also very excitingly starting again some of our face-to-face activities. So that's mainly activities aimed at young people, so teenagers, women, and for people with young families especially. So if ever you have anyone from like I say, an asylum seeking, or who's an asylum seeking family, or someone of a refugee background, or anyone who's an international person in Norwich, basically, you can signpost towards us for our activities. In terms of the issues faced by asylum seeking service users, there's quite a lot of them. So I'm going to go through some of the sort of the main issues now. Where to start? So one of the most difficult things for people is that usually there's quite a delay in terms. So when someone arrives in the UK as an asylum seeker, first of all, they make their asylum claim, and then they're invited to do what's called a substantive interview with the Home Office, and that's the basis of their asylum claim. And after people have done their substantive interview, which I mean, it does vary quite a lot, the amount of time that people have to wait to be able to do their substantive interview. After they have done the substantive interview, the Home Office says that usually takes about 6 months for them to process an asylum claim. But I think they meet that target in about 50% of the time. And that was before COVID. Obviously, with COVID and all the delays that's caused, it can be quite a lot longer. So a lot of people arrive in the UK and they have to wait quite a long time for the decision on their asylum application, which is obviously very frustrating. And we've found that a lot of people quite often people arrive with mental health difficulties for various reasons, but that waiting process often exacerbates those feelings, just because of the inertia and the frustration of having to wait, the fact that, like Beatrice said, asylum seekers can't usually work. So yeah, that can be quite frustrating. I'll come back to some other sort of like immigration related concerns in just a second. Some of the other issues that we see are to do with housing. So like Beatrice said, the main housing provider for asylum seekers in Norwich is Circle. And quite often people have issues with their accommodation. And although I can speak very positively about the people who work for Circle locally, it's just a bit of a clunky process, basically reporting issues with the property or anything to do with maintenance, anything like that. Basically, service users have to call migrant help, which is kind of like the outward facing, it's affiliated, but not exactly the same as the Home Office. And it's just a bit clunky. We have had quite a lot of issues with residents in the same Circle properties. As you can imagine, like relations between housemates are sometimes difficult in any case, and obviously exacerbated by any other sort of additional needs that people have. And then, as Beatrice and others I'm sure well know, when people get a positive decision on their asylum application, then that's quite a admin and labor intensive few weeks of scrambling around. Quite often people receive their status and then they have to leave their Circle property in a number of weeks, and they need to be supported to do things like make applications for socialising at the City Council, apply for council tax reduction, apply for universal credit, make sure that all of the bills are in order for the new property. So it's quite a lot to do. People have issues accessing healthcare. Like I say, a lot of people have acute sort of mental health needs. Usually in my experience, people are referred through the GPs, and for sort of diagnosed mental health needs, then people usually do eventually receive support, but obviously it's quite a slow process. And accessing healthcare in general. Thank you for that clarification on migrant help. Especially accessing healthcare, it's the people from abroad team who usually support people to register for GPs and do applications for HC2 certificates, and just sort of the admin around at the edges. But obviously they're quite strained in terms of resources. There's only a few members of the asylum health team to support all of the asylum seekers in Norwich. So we do the best we can, but that's another issue. Asylum support, obviously, as Beatrice said, people only receive around £39.63 per week. So that's not a lot to live on. Although people are not charged for accommodation, obviously that's got to cover everything, like food, toiletries, any clothing. And so quite often people approach us and ask for referrals for things like school uniforms or other sort of more significant one-time costs, for example. There have been quite a few issues with the way that the asylum support is sort of issued. So asylum seekers receive an ASPIN card, which is like a prepaid cash card from the Home Office. But yeah, as you can imagine, there are quite often issues with these things, and there's delays in payments. The Red Cross, I've got to say, are absolutely fantastic, supporting people to make sure that they have emergency payments, and helping people around the edges to make sure that they are receiving the correct amount, doing applications for various forms of support that people can get as asylum seekers or failed asylum seekers. But yeah, there are kind of issues with that as well. Let me see, education. So adult asylum seekers are entitled to 3 hours per week of statutory education. Most of the adult asylum seekers study English for speakers of other languages at City College. And I can't speak highly enough of all of the teachers and support staff at City College. They're fantastic, but again, there are some issues there with making applications and completing the necessary paperwork. As you can imagine, I mean, a lot of these issues relate to admin, basically. It's a bit tricky to do that. Obviously, the admin that institutions like to specify in the UK is quite often very culturally specific, and obviously the English they use is not easy either. Fortunately, for adult asylum seekers, people can attend English classes, obviously, at New Routes, at English Plus, or the Workers' Educational Association. But as far as I'm aware, asylum seekers don't have the right to attend the Norfolk County Council Adult Learning. It's important to note that the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, they do have the right to receive more hours of statutory education. So again, they usually study English for speakers of other languages, but they receive about 16.5 hours per week, and their provision is generally better. Finally, yeah, just two more things. So yeah, second last thing, obviously issues with social isolation. As you can imagine, people who arrive in the UK as asylum seekers, they've been taken away from their support networks, and depending on what countries of origin people come from, there can be very few other speakers of the same first language here in Norwich. So that can be a bit tricky. And so what we try to do is either signpost people to social events. Like I say, it could be our social events or English Plus, Norwich International Youth Project. And we use the NCAN network as extensively as we can. Obviously, we signpost people towards places of worship, usually mosques. We've also got a mentoring scheme, or we did have a mentoring scheme where basically we pair someone who's been in Norwich for a bit longer up with someone who's newer in Norwich. And that could be someone who's from Norwich originally, or like I say, someone with a bit more experience living here. And then that relationship can be more a friendship, or it can be more sort of goal orientated. And we're doing training around that, and we're hopefully going to have a new intake of volunteer mentors towards the end of October. So we hope to get that back up and running, because that's absolutely fantastic. And the final issue, which I guess it's a more nuanced problem that affects asylum seekers, is that so failed asylum seekers, they usually receive what's called Section 4 support. And during the pandemic, a lot of people were granted Section 4 on the basis of the public health crisis caused by COVID. And what we're seeing now is because COVID is coming to an end, in inverted commas, the Home Office is again starting with evictions of people who had no basis of remaining in the UK apart from, like I say, the Section 4 related to coronavirus. So we've been trying to help people on an individual basis. Whether that eviction can be enforced has a lot to do with people's country of origin or other needs that they might have, like health needs. But yeah, we've been doing the best that we can to support people with that. I'm conscious that it feels like I've been speaking for an eternity, so I'm going to stop now. But if there's any questions, then yeah, please put them in the chat or ask them now.
Does anybody, Patrick, that was really, really powerful. Thank you. You weren't talking for an age, so it was really, really powerful. Anybody got any questions of Patrick? Oh, there you go. I'm sure that there might be some thoughts afterwards, and yeah, and we can provide everybody with details of how to contact you via email. But no, thanks, Patrick, and do stay and contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Shall I go next, Beatrice?
Oh, yeah, sorry, please.
Okay. So I'm Rosie Sexton, and I run English Plus. We work very similarly to New Routes, and I don't want to repeat what Patrick said because he put it so well. I have to say, listening to it all, I think he summarised it brilliantly. My key frustration is I feel we do all the stuff around the edges in the Home Office and make all the decisions. So we do as much as we can to support people, but sometimes it's incredibly frustrating because you can't really get the nub of their problems. And decisions for them as asylum seekers are out of their hands, which is a really hard place to be. And some people can be in that place for years, which is really difficult. So we work around integration. One of the key things we do is English lessons, and that's really the first step for many people towards integration. So we have currently 1 face-to-face lesson and 2 online sessions a week, informal free drop-in sessions run by volunteers to support the 3 hours a week that people get through statutory provision. If people come in through the official programmes of coming into the UK, they're eligible for a while to a lot more English language. What we find, and we're finding, is we're seeing more and more of the Syrian cohort that came through, because some of them struggled with the formal lessons that they got, maybe through low literacy levels, maybe through no education at all in the past. And so people are looking firstly for slower, lower level English lessons, and also for community, often outside the Syrian community. So we're picking up people from there. We're picking up people from Hong Kong as well. That's not strictly asylum seekers, but people from Hong Kong are now coming into Norwich. There's quite a few, and have lots of issues because they're not so eligible for benefits, but need to work very quickly. So we're in a really difficult position. We're not seeing so many of the current Afghans coming to the UK. However, there are some who've already come through the unofficial routes who are starting to come to lessons and need support. They don't get much support. They get the same level that Patrick and Beatrice were both talking about, which is very minimal support. Whereas if you come through one of the 2 government programmes, I wish everyone got that support, because it's much better, and for people it makes life so much easier, and the transition as well. We're seeing a few of those people who are coming through, who are in the normal Serco housing, and we've also been supporting some Afghans here for a while, but I'll come back to that in a minute. In COVID, I think a lot of our services changed, and this is where something that really came to the fore, and that's the partnerships and networking. And I think that's one thing that English Plus, as well as Bridge Plus New Routes, are very keen on. And that's one of the reasons we work together. It provides a much better service for asylum seekers and refugees. It's a much clearer pathway, and one of the hopes is that it provides a better service to people where there's not so much overlap, but we can offer complementary services and an easy way to refer people from one service to other. We also run a network called English Plus does, which is Red Cross, New Routes, and other people who are working on the ground with asylum seekers, and that's been a really good way just to pull people together. All of us were involved in setting up City of Sanctuary, and I think networking is key to the services that you can provide and pass people on to when they need help that you can't offer, and it means you can specialise in what you can do. During COVID, we started offering food boxes out to people. Patrick mentioned those who have no recourse to public funds, and Asylum Seeker, the money that people on universal credit was receiving went up very quickly as the government recognised that prices had gone up during COVID. But for Asylum Seekers, it took many more months, and the increase was, I think, 30 pence a week people got as an increase. So it was significantly less. So we started offering food boxes for help there, but also for keeping in touch with people who we knew were needy, and it gave people an opportunity to ask for help with issues such as immigration, doctors, dentists, schooling, all sorts of stuff, data, digital devices, so people could access schooling and other lessons on online. Supermarket vouchers for people to get food where they needed it, phone calls, help with forms, filling in, all of this went on during COVID, and our workload changed, though we were still offering lessons, but it also increased massively. And we very much worked as a partnership then to identify the most vulnerable clients we felt and make sure that they were well supported. I thought, rather than me just talking, it might be interesting just to hear about a family who we've been supporting. So they came from Afghanistan many years ago. The wife had not been to school at all, so she was illiterate. She, when I first met her, we asked people to write their name on the board, never done that again. She couldn't write, so we immediately embarrassed her unintentionally in front of other people, but it's sometimes easier to get people's spelling than try and pronounce it several times. She came in as a refugee. Her family were with her, so she had 5 kids, and her husband had been here a while already. He didn't come to lessons for ages, but gradually we found out actually he was not very literate either. And so he's been coming along to lessons as well for a while, but it definitely took the wife coming to encourage him to come along. We were supporting the family when the children were younger with issues around schooling, then volunteering and employment. They've all had help with immigration issues, which we've referred to Red Cross, Bridge Plus and NCLS at different times. Medical issues, where we've helped them with appointments, and complex issues at the doctors where they've just wanted help with translation and somebody who knows some of the issues. When we got to know the family, they had no other community in Norwich because there was no other Afghan people that they knew. This has gradually increased. There are a few people around, and then the next contact was a daughter-in-law who came over from a refugee camp in Pakistan and moved here. She didn't have any friends or community, started coming to English Plus because she also had no English. So she started there and joining some of the community activities to make friends. And recently she's been in a lot of contact with us, very distressed about family stuck in Afghanistan. And this is where, again, we've tried to help her with what the options are available. And unfortunately, they're very limited. Because the family will have to get outside Afghanistan, go to an IDP camp, and prove that they're vulnerable and so need to leave. So we're trying to help the family as much as we can with that. And then also we've got new people who have come to Norwich needing support, who've come by the illegal route, and they are asking for help with transport, families stuck in Afghanistan, help with education, and just trying to get volunteering while they're unable to do anything else. So one of the things we try to do is to help people gain, while they're waiting, gain community through activities, maybe upskill slightly so they can do volunteering at cafes. We run programs on the boards or the museums where they can get volunteering experience, and also driving theory and food safety courses, so people have something to do while they're waiting. I think I'm going to stop there because I don't want to just read a long list. But again, do come back to me if you've got any questions, but I'll hand back to Beatrice now.
Thank you very much. So briefly, Bridge Plus, the organization I represent. So within the Norwich Integration Partnership, which is the New Roots English Plus and Bridge Plus together, our role is predominantly around information, advice and advocacy support, mainly around welfare benefits issues, housing, as well as facilitating access to local services. Just to mention that we don't work with asylum seekers because the Red Cross Refugee Project in Norwich provides specialist support to asylum seekers in terms of their asylum claims. And as you have seen from Patrick's and Rosie's presentations, they also provide wraparound support to asylum seekers. So we didn't feel that we would add much value to their work. So we support people once they've been granted refugee status. Between 55% and 60% of our service users are from a refugee background at Bridge Plus. And in fact, actually, I should mention that the Bridge Plus was set up by local residents themselves from a refugee background because they felt that once people get refugee status, there was a need for quality advice, and that at the time there was a gap there. Service users from refugee background are from over 20 different nationalities, but the majority are from DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, as far as the Bridge Plus service users are concerned. So just a few learning points, but there's obviously quite a bit of overlap with what Rosie and Patrick have already mentioned. So I'll be very quick on some of those points. But just to reiterate again how difficult the move-on period. So when people get their refugee status, which is obviously very good news, but they have 28 days, as Patrick explained, to move out of their circle accommodation, apply for mainstream welfare benefits, get a job, or find other ways to have finances and find housing, obviously. So it is really a race against time, and a lot of charities have raised concerns about this timing of 28 days because it has pushed a lot of refugees into poverty and homelessness. Health, also again, Rosie and Patrick have mentioned it, but particularly mental health. A lot of people, their mental health is really overlooked. There is no specialist provision. People may have experienced PTSD and other very traumatic, have seen very traumatic events. And I just wanted to mention Dr. Hamid's clinic. This was run at City Reach before COVID. City Reach has now closed, but I understand that Dr. Hamid, who is from the NSFT, will be hoping to start his monthly clinics again as a volunteer. So he's a trained psychiatrist. And also Dr. Emily Clark, who is a GP in Norwich, did some research. We helped facilitate some of the focus groups around barriers to healthcare services faced by asylum seekers and refugees. And I know Emily would like to do more work around this. Many people say they like Norwich. They find it a welcoming place. The voluntary sector locally offers many opportunities for people to make friends, settle down, and have peace. However, we have to mention the issue of racism, because people do face racism, and unfortunately, most of the racist incidents are not reported. So there's still a significant issue around underreporting. And again, there's no specific funding for projects, aimed at addressing those issues. That is a real gap. And among our service users, we know that people from Black, who are Black, from Black ethnic minority background, women who are Muslim, and where hijab are particularly affected. Employment has obviously been mentioned, but again, most of our service users who are from a refugee background are in 0-hour contracts with very little prospect of career, progression opportunities. And there used to be a really good employment support project aimed at refugee professionals. And as far as I know at the moment, there isn't much going on, which is, properly funding. I know that, for example, English Plus and some high-level ESOL classes aimed at, people from professional backgrounds. So it's all very helpful, but there isn't a real, coordinated approach to this. The NHS, for example, at the moment doesn't have, any opportunities for refugee healthcare professionals who would like to requalify, which is a very costly process. Norwich City Council, long time ago, ran a very successful work experience scheme. Can't remember the name off the top of my head. But again, I really think that those kind of initiatives will be very useful. Should I very briefly tell you about, I've just thought of one of our service users from a refugee background, Samira. She's from a Middle Eastern country. She came to the UK in 2010. She was planning to go to uni in her home country when something happened and she had to leave and put all of her plans on hold. It took 4.5 years for her to get refugee status. And this was obviously 5 years leave to remain, and then she had to apply for indefinite leave to remain. She has now indefinite leave to remain, but she told us how insecure this, made her feel. And even when she got 5 years, she very soon thought about, what if, I don't get indefinite leave to remain, what would happen? So this has caused a lot of anxiety, stress, and she was diagnosed with depression. She now has long-term health problem, which is obviously a major barrier to her making more progress towards her life goals. We've been supporting her for a number of years now with some of the more complex benefits issues. She's on the welfare benefits legacy system, so in receipt of ESA, and we also referred her at the time when she needed to reapply for PIP. We referred her to Equal Lives, and we've also helped her with a lot of utility issues she had when she moved to a new home just before the COVID pandemic. She has a real talent for cooking, especially baking, and she's taken part in some of the fundraising events that we've organized. In 2019, we organized a great get-together event during Refugee Week in partnership with New Roots and English Plus and the Octagon Chapel. I think we had over 500 people who came, and she did all the baking, and it was just absolutely amazing. Her dream is to actually establish her own catering business. So I'll finish on that positive note, because I think, we tend to talk a lot about issues and problems and sort of problematizing people, if that makes any sense. But I think we also need to think about all the positive life stories that people we meet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Beatrice. And yeah, sorry, Rosie, I didn't, we sort of went straight into Beatrice. I didn't thank you for your presentation and give people the opportunity to ask you questions or make any points. So thank you both. Anybody got any thoughts, questions, points they want to raise? I think there's some interesting I mean, I've posted a few things. I'm not talking about my things being interesting that I've posted in the chat, but I put the link to City of Sanctuary, which is a really important group that emerged out of need and wanting to do something positive. Natasha at the County Council would like to link in with you, Patrick, to sort of clarify the offer in terms of adult education and learning. So we'll facilitate that after the meeting. Alison, I know you've mentioned about City Reach, and I know there was a lot of we were involved in being quite concerned about the loss of City Reach. Do you want to say something about that service, just to explain what that does and how that can work? That is working with asylum seekers and refugees.
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually the lead for the new Norwich Vulnerable Adult Service from the Clinical Commissioning Group. And yes, so City Reach does no longer exist, but what we do have is Norwich Vulnerable Adult Service, which has different tiers. So we have tier 1, and that looks after our most vulnerable who are very chaotic, and that's looked after by one of our clinical leads, and we have GPs and nurses, and we have a whole host of sort of health professionals that look after our sort of most vulnerable. Then it goes down to tier 2, and also so that covers our health inclusion groups, and then we have a separate LCS. So LCS stands for Locally Commissioned Service. So that's what our GPs support us with. So we have 8 practices in Norwich that are signed up to provide this LCS for asylum seekers and migrants. And again, unfortunately, this new service was launched just as COVID hit and went a bit crazy. So unfortunately, it hasn't stood up on its legs properly. But I'm and the service lead and the clinical lead are working with the practices involved with this to make sure that they are providing what's specified in the specification and contract, but also to make sure that they are meeting all the needs. And we're working very closely with the people from abroad team, because we are aware that, you know, that group is the people that know who these people are, and make sure that they are linking in with the relevant services, but also making sure that they are being registered at practice as well and getting the right support. And we know that, so we've been working a lot actually with Emily Clark and with Wentworth Valley Practice, where Emily now works, to sort of address the sort of mental health side of these issues, because we realise that they are kind of overlooked. And I know sort of on the more sort of wider scale of the health inclusion groups, so our homeless and other groups as well, is that they are often forgotten about. And that's something that myself and the CCG are very keen to make sure they aren't, especially through COVID. We realise that actually the health inequalities is very vast with this group. So there is a lot of work going on in the background, but I think it's, again, use the phrase, unfortunately, because of COVID, everything's taken a bit of a backseat. But from going forwards, we are sort of looking to progress this and make sure that they are considered. So yeah, I think in terms of City Reach and its sort of demise, although that doesn't exist, there is a service in place that does support this, so they haven't been forgotten about. And we are linking with people from Broad Team to make sure that they are having their health needs addressed. And we're working very closely with Laura Oakes, who is our asylum seeker nurse that is linked to the Vulnerable Adult Service.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody got any questions around that issue? Okay, thank you. And the other point in the chat was from Christina. Do you want to just do something to promote the NAS? That would be really useful, because we make assumptions because we know about your awesome work that everybody else does.
Okay, yeah, so I'm from the Norfolk Assistance Scheme. So we run a local welfare scheme, so we can provide food, cash, or fuel for people pretty swiftly within 24-48 hours. We can then go on to help them with other things within 28 days. We try to turn our applications around in 10 days. So we can look at the group you were talking about that have newly got their right to remain, are very swiftly being put into housing. we could look definitely at helping them with furniture, white goods, anything like that. We've also recently been promoting school uniform, laptops, smartphones. We also still have a small amount of our budget left for people with no recourse for public funds. So we will always help people with no recourse to public funds if they come through to us with a support worker. So do please use us. We're there. And if you let us know ASAP when you put your application in, we'll make sure it's a priority, make sure we can speak to you to get it put through really quickly. The other thing is, if you would ever like me or any of my team to come to your organisation just to give an overview of what we do, I'm quite happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely. Succinct. Thank you, Christina. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I'll hand over to Des. Is that okay? Thank you.
Hi. Okay, the first thing to say is we don't really give advice on refugee asylum seekers, simply because it's quite an expert field, and we've sort of got quite a lot of cases on other sort of subjects. But we will advise on family reunion for those who've got refugee status, and we'll also advise on indefinite leave to remain for those people who are applying after the 5-year status in the UK. At the moment, yeah, obviously with the Afghan crisis and the lots of people perhaps wanting to apply for status in the UK of some description, we have volunteered through ILPA, Immigration Legal Practitioners Association, to be on a referral scheme to take some clients who need some help. But there's been loads of referrals have been put through that scheme, but they're really quite difficult, all of them. So I have accepted one at the moment and might accept more if we deem that we've got the capacity to do so. But they are all very difficult, so they revolve around sort of people who either want to bring their family to the UK or who are still in Afghanistan. There's quite a lot still in Afghanistan, which of course is the big problem at the moment. In terms of a couple of things just about the resettlement scheme, the new Afghan resettlement scheme, and the existing one that was in place for people who worked with the NATO forces, is that of course it does differ from other avenues of claiming asylum in the fact that it is much like the Syrian programme and other programmes as a resettlement programme. So people are picked to go on this rather than them having made an application. And I think the other key thing to remember is that no one in the UK will be able to apply on this scheme. So it's not open to applications from within the UK. And people can also not apply through British embassies or outposts throughout the world. So it is very much people who are picked. So there will already be been drawn to the attention of the UNHCR. And here comes the big problem of it, because people who are in Afghanistan at the moment really aren't going to be open to applying on that scheme at all, or rather not applying or being picked on that scheme because there is no presence. So it is going to be people who have left Afghanistan at the moment and are probably going to be in refugee camps in countries outside. But that's not uncommon in refugee crises for it to be that sort of situation. But it is just a key thing that a lot of the challenge for us as immigration advisors in helping with people is people who have got family members either in Afghanistan or who have made their way to the UK and who want to apply for asylum. If they do apply for asylum, it won't be on the Afghan resettlement scheme. It will just be an asylum claim, a normal one with all the normal sort of support packages. So in effect there could be two sort of different groups of Afghans making the application. So I think that is just an important thing to sort of bear in mind. Yeah, under the resettlement scheme, they're granted indefinite leave to remain, of course, at the beginning of their entry to the UK. So that does mean that they don't go through that period of 5 years all the time. So there is slightly different with the Afghan resettlement scheme, in that they will get indefinite leave to remain at the very beginning of it. It will be granted under the protection route, so they should still be able to apply for the family members to come and join them through different means. There'll be various means of doing that, but they should still be able to do that. I think the other thing is, in terms of advice, I think the other point from our point of view is crucially important that people get impartial legal advice and help with their immigration status. And I think that's always, and as we know, that it's difficult to get that advice, particularly for asylum. And in Norwich, there's only a couple of places who have the legal aid contract for asylum in the whole East Anglia. I think there's still Solomon's still doing outreach in Norwich. Does anyone know if they still do it? No.
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Don't think so, no. So there's Solomon Solicitors, and there's the next one is Fisher Jones Greenwood in Colchester, who are able to give advice on asylum claims. And they cover the contract for East Anglia, including the Norfolk area. I don't know if it's useful. Does anyone want me to give a sort of overview of asylum and how you claim it? I'm not an expert in it by any means, but I can certainly give a quick overview if anyone wants me to.
Yeah, I think that might be useful.
Okay. Yep, just bear with me. I'll just pick something up here. So I think Patrick already alluded to the fact that when someone comes and claims asylum in the UK, they have an initial screening interview with an immigration officer. That's the person who they've probably said they want to claim asylum to, and then after that they are invited to a substantive interview, which, as Patrick said, can be quite a long wait until they get that, and very variable how long the wait is. At that one, that's where all the information is gathered on their claim, and it is really useful, in fact probably crucial at that point, that they've already got legal advice before they go to that appointment. That's normally where most of the mistakes are made, really, in terms of presenting the case. So it's really crucial that they have good, sound legal advice at that point when they make their first substantive interview with the Home Office. It's normally after what's been said at that interview then that all issues of credibility, etc., then start to surface, which is one of the key parts of asylum claims that the Home Office like to sort of highlight, is about credibility of the person making the claim. Asylum is made on the basis that the person has a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country. The standard of proof for well-founded fear is fairly low, in fact, actually. So you don't need to show a very high sort of proof or very much proof that you have a fear of persecution. The persecution does need to be in one of the convention reasons, which is race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Okay. And you need to show that. And it needs to be sufficiently serious to breach Article 2 of the Human Rights Article as well. Home Office will take into account whether there's other areas in the country where the person could relocate to. So it's not sufficient to say that you feared persecution in a particular city of a country, because it may be the Home Office say, well, you could just move to a different part. And obviously the bigger the country is, the more likely the Home Office are going to say that. If you don't meet one of the convention reasons, you may still be granted what's called humanitarian protection rather than the full refugee status. So you may well still get 5 years leave to remain in the UK. So this is the normal route. After being granted refugee status of 5 years in the UK, you can then apply for indefinite leave to remain through the protection route. That would normally be granted. So it can be a difficult application, because you just have to make sure that the circumstances of the person have not changed, and also that there's been no substantial changes to the country where they've sought asylum from, because that could impact on them getting indefinite leave to remain. But it is very unusual for people not to get indefinite leave to remain after the 5-year period. Okay, because that would be essentially revocation of the refugee status at that point. So that's a sort of general overview of it. Really, if I'm happy to take any questions if I can, I'll try and answer them.
Any questions for Des? Beatrice?
Thanks, Des. Just wanted to add, obviously you're absolutely right in terms of, the applications for indefinite leave to remain that would, should be granted. But I think in terms of people's experiences, it just adds to this feeling of insecurity.
Yeah.
And, advice now has to be at level 2. So, obviously you now are doing all these referrals to yourselves because a lot of people were granted refugee status 5 years back in 2016. It must have been a year where there were a number of people granted refugee status. So 5 years later is now. So, it does create a lot of issues, even though, as you said, people, are very likely to have their application granted.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, years ago, they used to give refugee status as indefinite leave to remain, which is what they're doing with the new Afghan resettlement scheme. But it used to be granted as indefinite leave to remain, and there was all sorts of good things about that as well at that point, because it used to be that you used to get a big backdate payment as well of income support, etc., because you should have got that from the very start of your asylum claim. So you no longer get that, unfortunately. So there are all those sort of changes as well. But yeah, and there is a lot of uncertainty. And of course, it is, while they would be accepted, that's a good application. So of course, it's always possible to make a mess of indefinite leave to remain application if you've not got advice or you've got the wrong advice. So that's it's always possible to make a mess of it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We had invited the people from abroad team to come, but they were unable to come. And Simon Shreve has just literally about 10 minutes before the meeting started sent me a PowerPoint presentation to sort of explain what they're doing. So the plan is that we will send the presentation out with you, but I just wanted to maybe give you some highlight information from the slides, and then any questions once you've received the presentation, obviously direct them to the Simon at the People from Abroad team, and we'll include his email. But they talked about the the ARAP, I think is what it was called. So the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme runs in parallel with existing schemes, and it will be delivered in Norfolk by the People from Abroad team. And the UK government has announced that there'll be 20,000. This is nationally. Vulnerable Afghan people will be able to apply, and there'll be 5,000 this year. In Norwich or Norfolk, there have been 19 ARAP cases to date, which is for single adults and families. There are 9 more properties being offered to the Home Office. Bye, BB. Several more properties are being processed. They've made the point that this isn't just about housing, it's about access to local services and transport. That there's been overwhelming public support for people, and that there's a website link. The Alive Church is managing clothing donations, but they're currently unable to take more clothing donations at this time, and they'll be operating a cashless shop. The Bishop of Norwich has received over 36,000 in donations to date, and the People from Abroad team are collecting furniture, etc., to equip, and they've had lots and lots of offers of help, which is amazing. They've said, so I think it is worth sending this out. They've talked about ESOL, about confident women and childcare courses and responsibility for their role in relation to health. And I would assume that they're working very closely with local healthcare providers. Oh, thank you. They've mentioned as well, and we will have seen the news, that there are significant numbers of people trying to cross the English Channel, not necessarily from Afghanistan, but we have to look at this in the wider context. And it's likely that people talk about illegal routes, but it's likely that there will be an increase in people fleeing Afghanistan as they seek overland routes to the UK in the coming weeks or months. Yeah, and then they've put their information, but they basically said check the County Council website for latest information and about what help and donations are needed. And if we haven't listed it, we don't need it, basically. So that's quite a useful presentation, which I've skimmed through. Probably have completely misrepresented all of it, but you can, when you receive it, you'll probably think, was that what Jane said? So, but yeah, apologies. I just wondered from maybe, and it's difficult to do a general catch up, isn't it, via Teams, but I just wondered, I guess I have a question of the voluntary groups here, as someone who's worked in the voluntary and community sector for quite a long time, and Des made the point about the importance of impartial and independent advice. What is the relationship between the grassroots voluntary groups providing this work with some of those made most vulnerable by their circumstances and the county council, and is the balance right? We often talk, we have a really brilliant relationship and they're amazing people working in the People from Abroad team, but we've sometimes been concerned at the issue of the power imbalance potentially. The most vulnerable in our society are very dependent on help from people that have control over their access to healthcare, to education, to housing. So I'm just interested in understanding the relationship between those of you that got specific responsibilities to work with refugees and asylum seekers, and is that balance right? Does that make sense, that question? Balance of power, relationships? Because you've talked about ESOL and health, and there's a lot of that in the presentation from the People from Abroad team. Just any thoughts about that?
I'm happy to say something if people would like.
Thank you, Rosie.
I think a lot of the people we work with are extremely vulnerable, and I think just because of the route that you come through, I don't think there should be a discrepancy of the service. But unfortunately, not through the fault of the people from the council. That's where the funding is. And so actually there's quite a few people who all of us are working with in the charity sector who don't have access to the services that other people do. And I think that's a real shame. And actually there is an imbalance, and it's quite hard when you see need all around to make sure you focus on the people who haven't got needs met elsewhere. And also I think there's a real value in the charity sector remaining around, and one of my concerns is that if all of our services get taken away, then there will be people who are left without services who need it, and also if the government funding stops. So I think it's a very astute question, Jane.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for replying as well. So yeah, the impact on like short-termism and knee-jerk statutory sector, and it's this national government decisions, isn't it, about this is an emergency, this is what we will fund, when you've got grassroots groups that have always been there providing that vital support. So thank you. I'm not sure who was next. I've got Dan and Beatrice. So should we go Dan and Beatrice? Is that okay? Thank you.
Mine was a different point. So Beatrice, if you're responding to the same point, you might want to go next. But do you think?
Thanks, Dan.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Well, yes, just to add, I think, talking of power imbalance, I think when we look at funding, we have to keep applying for funding. Within the Norwich Integration Partnership, we haven't had any significant either government funding or local authority funding for our work with refugees. So I think, yes, there is definitely a power imbalance. And just to reiterate again, the risk that, of course, we welcome any resettlement program in Norfolk, but just to reiterate the importance of remembering that it's not just about people coming through resettlement programs. There were Afghan refugees and asylum seekers in Norwich before, this summer, and there will still be people coming through other countries. And if they get refugee status, and even when they don't, unfortunately, because a lot of decisions are overturned at appeal stage when people are able to appeal their asylum claim decision. But yeah, everyone is as deserving as anybody else. So I think it's the risk of hierarchy between, refugees depending on how they arrived to the UK. Thanks.
Thanks, Beatrice. Dan.
Thanks. So first obvious point is to say it's great that we're all together talking about this so we can identify gaps, overlaps, and do the best we can with what we've got, which is always the challenge. Just want to say a couple of things. First, from Matt's point of view, and then a personal point of view. One of the things that we find working with refugees is you still have intergenerational issues. You still have young people who don't get on with their parents. You still have young people who are growing up in a different culture in the UK who want to fit in, and their parents have different ideas for them. So we often work in that space, and it's really different, those different aspirations people have and understanding of, what it's like to live in Norwich. So just another thing that we all probably always are reminding ourselves of about, the need to just understand all the time, listen to what's going on. But the personal perspective is we've actually got family friends stuck in Afghanistan right now, who are at risk of being killed and have already been beaten up. And they're at risk because they're friends of ours and they've worked with us over years. So this is family friends. And I just wanted to make the point about the luxury that we live in the country that we live in, that we don't have to worry about that. And I might feel bad about that, and but I'm okay, just by the chance of my birth. So always like you all know this because you work in this field, but it's been quite difficult listening to this today. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And I think that is an important point, isn't it? And we all know someone, don't we? We don't always think that we do. We all know someone. Certainly those of us that work in the sector do. And then it's the personal impact. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on Louise. You've put something in the chat about that you're not working in Norfolk with refugee and asylum seekers, but you are in Suffolk, and I just wanted you to, do you want to contribute something about the work that you're doing in Suffolk that might be useful, helpful, interesting? It would be interesting.
So we work with the Suffolk refugees. We provide the immigration support, and we are now involved with the ILRs for the Afghans that East Suffolk Council have put in Lowestoft.
Do you want to explain what ILR is, just in case people don't know?
You think I'm not an immigration person at all?
I know.
Leave to remain.
We just slip into these acronyms, don't we?
Yeah, with the Afghans that have come into Lowestoft.
Okay. And how is that working, and how are the clients?
I don't know, because I don't think we've actually met them. It's all been done through their who got the contract for it. It's all been done through their support officers in the housing. So that's our liaison at the moment.
Okay, all right, thank you. And Alan, sorry to keep you waiting.
That's all, that's okay, Jane. And Dan, you just made it brought it home so powerfully. So thank you for sharing that, and it reminds us all why we're here. Jane, I was just responding back to your question. Excellent question. If you want, we could try to ask that question on the wider voluntary sector, smaller groups that we can do, local groups. So just trying to offer support to ask those questions you want, to try to get more evidence back relating to your questions. So if you want us to do that, I'm sure we can work with Karen and others to ensure we reach as many organisations as possible, if you think that would help, because it is a very good question, and you should be asking that and getting that feedback back, I believe.
What, the one about the imbalance?
Balance, yeah, absolutely.
All right then, thank you. And it's a difficult one sometimes, isn't it? Because when you question brilliant people who are doing great work, we work so closely with the people from the broad team, particularly around Des and the team have done some powerful work supporting women, for example, victims of domestic abuse with no recourse to public funds. But it does feel a little bit that there is an imbalance, particularly in this area at the moment. So, okay, thank you.
Well, the offer's there anyway, if you can help.
Okay. Is there anything else that anyone wants to bring to the table? Any thoughts, perspectives before we close with a couple of questions? Yeah, Debbie, thank you. And yeah, I think it would have been really helpful if they were able to come, Debbie. But yeah, we will do. We have done, and they know. We have talked about it. So yeah. Do you want to say anything, Debbie?
No, I mean, I don't. I'm not close enough to it, Jane, to understand sort of some of the discussions you're having specifically around this. But I do know that if power imbalance is quite a big thing, really. So I think we'd want to understand a bit more about it, and if there are concerns, then we'd want to know and understand a bit more and do something about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I don't think it's in the gift of the local authority. I think it's more about government and how it's deciding to manage and allocate these issues. But yeah, thank you. All right. I did want to just revisit. I guess it goes back to Dan's point, and one of the reasons when we talked about discussing this issue in Norfolk, it felt that it mattered and that it is relevant. And I think sometimes like Dan said, it's it affects somebody else. But I'd like to think that perhaps we've made everybody, maybe we all realised it was relevant, which is why we've come. But it is about sharing and spreading the message, making sure that those agencies and organisations and the local authority people know that they're there and where to access help. Issues around discrimination that Beatrice raised. I'd say probably weekly I'm challenging stuff on social media platforms about illegal asylum seekers and why don't they go to their next country. I guess we could all of us do one thing, couldn't we, and challenge one person. In my friendship group, I'm often challenging things that people say. So, and it goes back, there's a point that Simon Shreve has put on his PowerPoint presentation about this isn't just about accommodation, it's about infrastructure. And what is our role in raising those issues and challenging the rhetoric that there aren't enough houses and services for British people, and go back to Beatrice's point about the really low numbers of people who are fleeing and coming to the UK for sanctuary, that we're not being inundated. But before you go, I just want to ask you to do the not exciting questions, apparently, that Emily or Manu would like us to answer. Is that okay? And thank you
Yeah,
so much.
it's just a survey monkey type thing, so I'll just post it in the chat and people can answer when it suits them.
Okay, all right then.
Good.
So if there's no other points, then we'll put those questions in the chat. I'm hugely grateful to the speakers and thanks for the positive comments and the contributions in the chat and the questions. So thank you very much, and onwards, making a difference as we all are. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.